up to the university and take a look at some nascent technology and see if I might be interested in creating one after we sold the antenna company that I founded to AirGain. And prior to that, we sold our mesh networking company to Motorola. Our antenna company, by the time it was sold, made 750 million antennas shipped into the wireless industry. I am actually an applied mathematician by training, which bears here, interestingly enough, but it also bears on the customer base. And when I saw even the rough initial results from this a number of years ago, I realized that if it could be commercialized, it would be game changing. And from a business perspective, I got involved because many of the customers inside an electronic device, here's my prop, are the same ones at executive level I was dealing with for antennas, which also fit into these same smartphones. And by the way, into wireless TVs these days, if you're following that. So great to talk with you. I'm going to go through what we do and why it's good, and then I'm going to back up a little bit and tell you what's under the covers a little bit so you can see why what I'm discussing is true. So for Nanophotonica, technology focus and market focus. Nanomaterials themselves, notice not just quantum dots, and we'll give pictures in a moment, just enough pictures to, I think, to pique your interest, not so much that it will cross your eyes. And devices. And what I mean by a device is that for this to work, our friends, these little quantum mechanical quantum dots are used in concert with others, literally stacked together, as you'll see in a picture, and the sum of which creates the essence of something that lights up, be it a pixel for your TV or a flat panel that would be in a rear taillight in your car. Direct light emission EL-QLED is a mouthful. So I'm going to parse that. QLED is quantum dot based light emitting, so it lights up diodes. And I think many of you have known from your past efforts, or you may have seen, a diode is something that won't allow current to pass and therefore electricity to pass through it till a certain threshold is reached. That's true here. How that works is something that is where the sauce, and in some cases, secret sauce is. But the idea is that they are powered, and when they do, they light up. The characteristics of that light is governed by how you construct these nanomaterials and so-called devices. Electroluminescence, EL, means that a current from a transistor actually is passed through a QLED device. And when it does, the energy from the electrons and holes, which are pieces of current, if you will, the quanta of current, are converted to light energy. And you can control the colors of those lights. So one of the interesting things about you can do with quantum dots, and there are many, I'll talk about more in a minute, is to create light emitting devices this way. Current market focus currently displays and vehicle lighting more recently. Why? I'll reinforce in a moment, but think of very power efficient, takes low voltage to turn on, very pure colors. Blue is blue, red is red, and there's not much fuzz around that color, which is very attractive for things that light up, and extremely cheap. And I'll leave that dangling there for a minute. Some of the questions before we got started were around, what do we do with this beyond what I've just said? The military can use a variety of things, displays and lighting, by the way, themselves, but also things that relate to AR, VR. Think of, and believe me, I'm not telling any secrets out of school here, think of a pilot in a plane that's looking out on the real landscape, but superimposed on him or her is information about a rapidly approaching enemy. And that pilot looking out upon the landscape is actually not looking at the real landscape. They're looking at a display of the landscape to which these other things are superimposed. I mentioned medical, I think to Shirley earlier, and the interesting part about medical goes like this. These QLED lighting devices, whatever they are, don't generate much heat relative to old technology. And you'll have to take my word for that, I think, in our 90 or so minutes here. Because that's true, you can actually put very bright, high luminance lights inside the body, either surgically or orally, to understand what's going on in someone's esophagus, what's going on, down that particular trail, to understand whether cancers may be present, but to get a real good sense of that in a way that doesn't generate excessive heat that may be harmful to the patient. And as I mentioned to Shirley earlier, that's a perfectly valid application for this. There are other medical applications, and I won't touch on this again, but there are other medical applications that actually sense flow of blood and purity of blood in an interior manner by something placed under the skin. It's coupled to an indicator on top of the skin and replaced often, so it's flexible. And in doing so, it's a recurring barometer of certain elements of the health of the patient that can be monitored that way. And certainly I'm not an expert in this area. And interior lighting over time as well, not just vehicle taillights. So that's the overview here. Let's talk about one of the two applications a little. So I'm going to paint a picture for you on what the playing field that I'm talking about. So on the left-hand side, a TV, your smartphone over time, a laptop, et cetera, your iPad. If you blow it up, and you literally can do this at home if you've never done it before, you can literally see pixels. That is to say, areas that actually compose the elements of that display. And if you further blow them up, you're going to find that in some pattern or another, and these are two example patterns in the middle called QLED pixels. There's red, blue, and green. Sometimes there is white, but the core message here is every picture you see can be created by different relative proportions of red, blue, and green, as you may know. And for all displays, whether it's done Nanophotonica's way or some other way, the essence is, how do you make these pixels? Pixel design itself matters, so here's two examples, but that's not our ability. How do you make them so the colors are pure? It takes as least power as possible to power them. And remember, even in the era of green energy, even your TV matters because it's on probably way too much, as we keep telling our children or grandchildren. And that matters as well, and in such a way that you can cover and address all possible colors you want to. It turns out in the cases that I'm talking about, and this is the beginning of the description of how these interesting nanoparticles are used, every one of those red, blue, and green subpixels, the three of them together make a cluster as a pixel, are constructed as you see on the right. And the cathode and substrate is really a way to put potential difference across that particular subpixel. It's actually not done in the way you've seen. This is a cartoon. What it's done is there's a layer underneath with a bazillion, that's a technical term, set of very small transistors of hundreds of thousands to millions that turn these three colors off and on according to a driver signal that corresponds to the image that you want to show. The area where this fascinating technology comes into play is in the green layers. And remember, I mentioned layers before. So there's an anode, a cathode, and there's a substrate. Substrate is simply the base material. Could be glass, it could be flexible plastic, upon which this is built. The quantum dot is in the middle, and I'll talk more about quantum dots in a second, but it's the one that lights up in a particular manner red, blue, or green. And in fact, you could design quantum dots that create any other color as well. But if your objective is to efficiently, cost-effectively create light, and you know you can create any wavelength light that you want, use the basic colors and simply mix them together in some modified way. But the quantum dot alone is not the tale here. The quantum dot alone has to be accompanied by two others, and this is stylized. There's actually more layers in reality than this, and I'll show you. Things that guide, intensify, and balance charge into the vicinity, so-called Bohr radius, of a quantum dot. Why are we trying to do that? We're trying to do that because the quantum physical nature of a quantum dot is such that when charges recombine in the presence of this dot, literally within its boundaries, and think of the boundaries of this quantum dot as 2 to 10 nanometers. So forgive me if this is, too showy, but imagine a meter, right? So 1,000 billion nanometers end to end is contained within that meter. So these are really small devices, really small elements. So are the other two layers. The other two layers simply help electrons and holes, the building blocks of electrical current, and how they behave in very, very small sizes, which is why quantum physics applies to their energy level. And when they recombine, they generate light in a manner which we won't go through today. The beauty of the quantum dot, if it's guided and fed this way, is that you can actually create selectable colors by the characteristic of the quantum dot. Larger ones with a smaller band gap, that is between the energy at rest and the energy when it's excited by recombination, tends to produce and does produce very pure red color, green next, and blue next. And so the purpose of the electron transport layers and hole injection and transport layers are to make very sure that the quantum dot is fed with charge that recombines near it. Turns out that this process is a double-edged sword. It's a beautiful thing when they recombine right at the quantum dot because almost all of the energy in creates light out. It's not a beautiful thing if they recombine or somehow don't fully combine outside the region of this middle layer called the quantum dot. Why? Because they won't light up, and worse yet, they can be deleterious to this layer for each of these subfixes. And the reason for that is that unbalanced charge creates static energy, it creates heat, and shortens the lifetime of these kinds of devices. So this is the playing field from looking at your smartphone or your TV to what it's like and the things that they're made of to actually the things that we play in. Now, in the past, before I move on, all displays are made not this way, but they certainly have things at every pixel site that cause light. In the past, you've heard the term liquid crystal displays, which so many TVs have made of in the past. Very power inefficient, not pure. Think of a recessed lighting in your home, like in this room, actually. They would start with white light and they would filter out by certain tiny little filters that you would produce the particular color light that you'd want. In doing that, it's highly inefficient. It's really costly. So it's sort of like, the sports analogy is he's a little slow and he can't hit. In other words, it's really expensive and it's not well performing. And any other solution more recently has been better, but still extremely expensive. And I'll explain why in a minute. It's not expensive to do it this way. Not yet obvious. So this is the yet to be proven to you. This is sort of the good housekeeping seal of approval rating of ELQLED. And I'll explain why each of these are true. Color on the left. Why is it green, meaning really good? It's really good for color because the colors are very pure. And again, if I'm trying to generate a wavelength, which is how our eye sees color, that's red or green or blue or any others, but certainly for displays, red, green, and blue. The wavelengths generated for that are almost nil outside that single wavelength. Almost nil. Far better, far better than anything else could be done. They can be very bright. For lighting, they can be even brighter, and I'll show you our innovation for that. I'm not going to go through every one of these. I'll go to thinness. And I'm actually going to go back one. The entire area of stacks of these materials that are in green here, the sum of all of them together is about 120 nanometers thick. And it's really about 5 layers, by the way, but they all have this function in aggregate. What does that mean? It means it's actually hard to put down, but it also means it's flexible. So if you think about applications in the military later around the helmet, if you think of TVs that you may have seen in stores that are actually curved, frankly, they don't excite me, but they excite some. That's allowable because these layers in green are very thin, and the substrate down at the bottom, which is also not thick, can be made of flexible material, not glass. So the guts, the very guts of what is actually the display here in green is extremely thin, flexible, and as you'll see, able to be applied, and I'll tickle your fancy here, in an inkjet printer. You can print these displays like you would a poster in your kid's dorm room. Not the picture, but the actual guts of the display itself. So that's why it's thin. Power consumption, they're highly efficient, and viewing angles are almost 90 degrees in each direction. Why is that true? Well, if you think of a recessed light like the old technology, if you get close to it up near your ceiling or any place else, and you look at it from the side, it'll be partially blocked. But here, the material itself is actually the source of the light, not some other light generated some other way. So there's plenty of reasons to find these attractive. So the question now is a little bit more about what's going on with this stuff and why are these things true? I'm going to have to get rid of you good people. How do I minimize you? I hope it's here. No. No problem.
Dr. Morton?
Yeah.
Did you need some help doing something?
Sure. I'm seeing all you good people, and I actually can't do that right now and actually talk to. I can do it this way. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
You can minimize the participant box.
Yeah, and I'm missing how to do that.
Top of the box, there's a black border, and it has a line and a thicker line and a double line.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the same stylized stack. In our particular company, since we're focusing on this, what have we focused on technically here? Because this is an example now of what do you do with the power of a technology that can do the sorts of things that I just described. How do you actually render it, better than anyone else's and ultimately commercializable? It turns out there's 2 pieces to the problem. One is actually designing the materials for each of these layers. Now, quantum dots are made by many companies worldwide, and there's many patents that cover them for a variety of applications. We have some of our own too in our patent suite of the many we've generated since we took the initial work from UF. But it also turns out that these other layers are extremely important, as I mentioned before, and we have a number of patents, not just in our friend the quantum dot, that will emit light in the way that I described, but how it's fed by these other layers. So there's the notion of material and the design of the material, and there's an equal notion of how you combine them together. And how you do that is actually a fairly measurement intensive, experimentally intensive process. For those of you on the call that might have had, intense technical backgrounds, and in fact, my own in applied mathematics, I was originally a stochastic process guy. In other words, probability statistics, and the mathematics for that, if any of you recognize that. But here, while the guiding principles are certainly based upon quantum theory and material science, how to optimally combine these layers so the good is achieved, that is, the charges reach the quantum dot and are recombined and the quantum dot emits, and also the negative aspects that cause it not to emit efficiently or cause it to have less lifetime than you'd like. So there's a lot of work behind this, and some of it is, a large part of it is sort of optimal search, if you will, guided by core science. It also turns out in this industry, for your information, that quantum dots themselves can come in a variety of chemical makeups and still apply to this architecture. Some are based upon, and it's easiest to do, what are called heavy metals like cadmium, indium, and others. And they perform quite well. There is some upheaval around the world that they're going to be deleterious to you. Now, this is a great example of a business problem masquerading as a technical one, I can tell you. Why do I say that? Because there's more cadmium in the fish you eat than would ever be in a display that you're near. But those that don't want to use this particular approach and are tied through their investments in production technology to old technologies make a big deal out of this. Remember, for all of us, the scares about brain cancer in mobile phones, for example. I guess I'm not suggesting there's no correlation there, but there's probably, reasonable and prudent care, but don't hold it to your head all day long. But don't worry that you should never be using your mobile phones. That's for sure. It's the same way here. However, we have created dots that are heavy metal based and also free of them. Free of them is harder. We started with heavy metal based, and for things like TVs and laptops and tablets, it's perfectly fine, and it's certainly fine for lighting. I've already mentioned that area in green is about 125 nanometers, and it's printable. And this is the key to its cost effectiveness. You can literally print those layers. So imagine, I don't have a picture of this, but imagine those layers that are in an industrial printer, and instead of ink in the traditional sense, it's these materials in solvents, and these materials are light enough to float in solvents. So literally, a substrate will go through a printer, and we've done this experimentally already and with our partners, and I'll show you a couple of examples of that. And little inkjet printing heads come down and shoot a dollop of the first layer, and then on to the next printer, to the second, and on to the next printer for the third. Tiny little spaces, smaller in diameter than a micron. And again, very thin. And so current printer technology extends to about 300 pixels per inch. So imagine a scanning television like they work, and you can get 300 of those per inch, which is great for TVs and great for your laptops and your iPads. It is not good enough for smartphones, but we have found a way to extend this 2 to 3 times with normal printing technology so that it is applicable to your smartphone as well. So we're going after that too. Fascinating stuff. I mentioned before that these colors are very pure, and this is a several part graph. On the left-hand side, there's luminescence, right? How strongly it's normalized to 1, but it doesn't matter. They're very strong luminance. And blue around 450 to 460, green and up to red. And this shows, and I'll quantify that for a minute, that these colors are quite pure. If they weren't, it wouldn't be as narrow as sort of Gaussian curve, if you will, and as narrow a dispersion. It would be much broader. Any of the old technology, even competing new technologies, are not nearly so tightly constrained within the wavelength that you want them to be. And so what that allows you to do without filtering, therefore power loss, is create almost any color that you want out of these 3 colors and keep it as sharp as you want it to be. And on the right-hand side, while I'm not going to belabor the details of it, it's a picture of the so-called color gamut. And what this is intended to portray is that for any technology, quantum dot related devices like ours have the widest one. That is to say, you can create pure colors with a combination of red, blue, and green to almost any on the color spectrum that your eye can see. And in current development, we're at about 94% of the total gamut of colors you'd want for Rec 2020. What is Rec 2020, for heaven's sakes? It's actually the latest video standard. So this is not a standard for your email per se. It's certainly not a standard for standard pictures, but for moving video, which so many of us use now on any device. And so since these wireless and or wire connected devices where screens are so very important is the dominant form in which we look at these, the fact that they're this good is huge news. And it's because the spectrums are that narrow and they can be combined in a creative way to create any color you want. Again, we could directly create an orange, but why would we? We use 3 basic colors and we can do it through the transistors that fits this. So I'm taking you through something here on purpose. It's harsh in a way, but I'll show you literally what we show others. So along the left-hand side, and there's points to be made here, there's blue, green, and red. There's the peak wavelength shown above. In this case, it's about 465 nanometers, all within your sight. And you can see what the others are. We got a little aggressive on 0.8, but you get the idea. And we can control that, once again, by the makeup of the quantum dot, its size, and when you get to blue, some other tricks we play that I won't go through today. The full wave half max, what is that? It's essentially a measure of spread. So at half power, right, half power to its peak, how wide is that distribution above? And these are really narrow. And the fact that it's, 20 to 30, let's say, nanometers is that which allows us to create almost any color in that color gamut that you see up to the right. Fascinating. There's also measures of efficiency in this particular chart. Let me focus on EQE. And I'm taking you through this to make a point. EQE is called external quantum efficiency. So you can measure all the photons into the quantum dot. And then you look at the amount of light generated, not just by the quantum dot, but through this stack of materials called a device. And it's 15 to 22%. And you might say, that's awful. Really? Can it be no better than that? Well, here's what's at work here. First of all, efficiencies like this produce very bright displays, as I mentioned already. Second of all, interior to that little stack, that picture that I keep showing in green, light's generated every which way. And so there are other techniques not shown here to make these efficiencies higher than they are, to couple them out so your eye can see them. These numbers, by the way, in this world are the best. in the world for this. And there's other measures of efficiencies too, candelas per ampere of current, lumens, meaning a measure of luminance per watt generated. And they're very high, it turns out. And this is actually the language that we operated in. So at least on one chart, I wanted to share that with you. I wanted to share something else with you before I get back to the so what of all of this. I told you earlier, these things are diodes. They turn on, right? And here, as a function of each color, voltage along the bottom x-axis, current density, in other words, current really, across the substrate on the y-axis. And you can see that they turn on. That is to say, when voltages get past for red and green, 2.5. In fact, there they are on the right. You can see why I'm saying what I'm saying. For blue, it's a little bit higher. Why? Because the gap in energy between a normal quantum dot when it's not excited to when it is bigger. The thing that you don't see here, which makes it so attractive for lighting of any kind, be it display or anything else, is the fact that competing technologies take 6, 7, or 8 volts. So if you even start with things that we don't do, like Shirley's question about medical applications, you don't want to somehow invade the body in any way, shape, or form with things that have excessive heating. Of course, there's ways of dissipating heat, but dissipation of heat causes expense inside the body. It causes trouble. And for displays, it means that the power efficiency, which is the voltage it turns on sort of times the current, roughly speaking, that it produces, that therefore produces light, is far lower. And this is extremely important. So if you see at this stage, I've talked about color purity, narrow, the ability to create almost any color out of them. I've talked about cheapness because you can print them in a display. Now, why is that? Why are printing these things in a display such a cheap way to go? I mean, you still need printers. It turns out with other technology, there's a very material inefficient method in which you sort of cover the substrate with material, and the substrate is etched to only have a certain portion of the material stick to it. And then you blast away all the material with very high pressure and temperature. Not only are you wasting material, but you're also wasting the cost of those devices, which are extremely expensive. And you also fall prey to lower yields. So if you're actually in the business of producing such either materials or the actual displays that they are based upon, you're going to spend a whole lot of money, and you're going to pass that money on to the consumer. So that's why this technology is so important, and that's why the little, Consumer Report dots show attractive green in so many of those categories. I mentioned prior that you literally can print these, and this is a picture of the experimental printer that, in fact, we have a couple of these in our lab. So do our partners. I haven't talked about our business model yet, which is an interesting thing in itself that we'll get to. And the prototypes that we've done are up to 200 pixels per inch. All of the active layers, the stack of materials, are printed. We do this ourselves as proof of concept. We're certainly not printer experts. We use standard printers. But the inks are synthesized and formulated by us. And printer experts that we're not, although we show proof of concept, but our partners who are display manufacturers or lighting manufacturers actually are the experts that do this. And you see above red, green, and blue actual array of pixels printed on a 2-inch by 2-inch wafer. And standard printer, pixel densities for us about 200, with our more expert companions in the industry that are looking to put this in their displays next gen, even 300 pixels per inch. What have we done though about the smartphone market? because I told you earlier that the smartphone market is higher pixel density. Why, by the way, why is a smartphone higher pixel density? Well, look, the signals impinging upon this smartphone to print, display out moving pictures or still pictures or your email for that matter are coming in at a particular data rate and refresh rate, irrespective of whether they're going to my laptop or my phone, right? So if it's over a smaller area, naturally, the pixel densities are higher. And so what you see on your smartphone, heaven knows you've noticed this, is a sharper image. Over time, our TVs will get even sharper images as well. And the reason for that is that the communication networks that serve them, which I also happen to know a lot about, are getting to higher and higher bandwidths and lower delays. You may have heard of 5G mobile, or certainly other broadband technologies brought into your home by fiber or cable. So TVs will get to higher pixel densities as well. So in this particular chart, what have we done here? So on the left-hand side, it's still sort of a flat, meaning two-dimensional, right? A plane. And it's red, blue, green, et cetera. It's reminiscent of the actual shot of a pixel arrays that I showed you probably on the first chart past the intro. Same thing. And current printer technology, and we don't want to rely necessarily on new printer technology, actually can print at about 300 pixels per inch. How do you get higher? And this is really fascinating. We have found a way through a contract with the government, probably a year and a half ago. We have found a way to stack the red, blue, and green pixels on top of one another. What does that achieve, first of all? And then I'll tell you about how we do it. What does it achieve? What it achieves is that there's less real estate in the two-dimensional plane shooting out light than you used to need by a factor of, depending upon how you count this, 2 to 3. Certainly a factor of probably 3. And this has to do with things that are beyond the level of a talk like this on pixel design, et cetera. Why are we able to do that? Well, there's two kinds of problems. One of them is that in a given location where there's a stack, so this is now showing the vertical stack, a red pixel, a green pixel, a blue pixel. And by the way, there's an optimum way to stack them. Has to be fed. Those transistors that turn on those subpixels, red, blue, and green, still have to be there. So you see what you want to see in terms of pictures or even simple email. More importantly, though, it's because light generated our way is that very narrow spectrum. So if they're put on top of each other, what we realized and designed was that they won't interfere with each other much. The one on the bottom is not going to be somehow mixing with or terribly attenuated by the two on top of it, which is a really interesting thing. And we patented this as well. It's still nascent technology. I don't want to mislead you in any way, but it's going to substantially change the pixel density and therefore the applications for what our technology can provide without necessarily depending upon a new generation of inkjet printers, which would be more expensive and it would gate our success in the marketplace. So really a fascinating use of this, I think, and more to be done. I'll also say in passing that I mentioned lighting, and I have a picture here of lighting, lighting a different way, that is vehicle tail light specifically. But it turns out that vehicle taillights, for reasons of safety, have to be extremely high luminance, really, really bright, really bright. So in addition to necessarily stacking the pixels this way, you can actually stack layers of pixels. So the stack can be deeper so that in the given area of the light, they will sum up to each other and the total light out luminance is going to be what a rear taillight needs. So the vertical stacking may not be red, blue, and green. It may be actual just whole pixel. They'll be attenuated some, but not so badly. You can put blue under blue, green under green. You can get the idea in a way that allows us to meet that spec. So there's clear industrial considerations for why we bothered to do this technical. That's the point. Here's a picture. And let me tell you what you're looking at, and let me tell you also how it differs from what I've talked about before. This is a prototype rear red portion of a tail light made in our laboratory. What's going on here? Well, this plane is not a single tiny little pixel, but it's inches by inches. It's, oh, I don't, this one's probably, we've made several. This is probably 5 inches square. It's a demonstrator, of course. So we're not dolloping tiny little dollops of nanomaterials in each area to make something this big. We could, but what we actually did was made it one huge megapixel. That is to say, we have a substrate under all of it. We have the layers of nanomaterials that are spread across all of it in a particular laboratory manner, and there's various levels of sophistication on how to do that. The attractiveness, again, it's to the lighting industry, the vehicle lighting industry. It's cheap, and the color is very pure. And as you probably can guess, there are very strict regulations on not the design of the rear tail light so much, but how clear, think color purity, and of course, how bright important signals are from a car. I'm stopping, I'm turning are the two, of course, that are most critical to vehicle safety. So we have been accessed by and done a project with a company, a Canadian company, and soon another, which I can't talk about yet, frankly, but soon another, that are essentially subsystem suppliers of lighting to people like Audi, BMW, Ford, et cetera, et cetera. And they're interested in this for, again, for its cost effectiveness, its color purity, and its ability to generate this also on flexible substrates. If you think of lights, especially rear tail lights now on all of our cars, they have to be curved, because they don't have to be, but they are, because they're an edifice of the car that's dictated by style, very much so. So the fact that this can be done in this manner with very thin layers is attractive to the auto industry as well. So this is another example of something that we're active in. Before we talk about this, I want to talk now about the business side of this. The question then is, if you realize that you can go through a path of commercialization, which is not quick, by the way, what do you do with that technology, and how do you choose to form a company around it? You could, in principle, decide, I'm going to get in the display business. Not just the colors that make up the display, but the powering and the chassis and all of that. And I'd be competing with giants like Samsung, like LG, like several Chinese and Taiwanese companies that are, make billions of dollars a year. And to do that, what kind of money would I need to raise? I would probably need to raise, no exaggeration, $1 billion in order to do it. And still, I would be at a disadvantage by those mega companies that already have customer credibility and relationships. So we chose a different path for that. What I'm here to describe to you now in this last piece of this, until we get to questions, is the path that we chose, and a little bit more about why we chose that path. So how do we take this interesting stuff that we can do and utilize it? Well, the next two charts talk about strategy of the company now, not necessarily the capitalization, other than the fact this is a far cheaper way to go. It has its own risk, by the way, like any business plan. But starting with product, I've mentioned already that we're focusing on materials for sure. Lots of people focus on quantum dots. We have our own version, but the materials and the other layers and how to optimize the system of those layers. So what we focused on in order to make rapid progress that others did not initially anyway, is that all of the device layers, and a lot of our IP is around how to make a device system work well, and the materials. We didn't focus on any other kind of technology. We're not going to make, I will not go into QD overlays today, but I do want to stress the fact that we're not making in product. We are focusing our core competence and our highly competent team on the things that we know well that we can produce. And that is the material science and the materials and the science of how to combine them together in an optimal way. I mentioned far lower capital. I mentioned matching core competencies, and you can recruiting headaches for sure. Because some of the others that I've done, for example, our antenna company had 1,000 people by the time we sold to the company in 6 countries. This is not that kind of play, not intended to be that kind of play. But this technology is applicable to multiple markets. So that's why we chose that particular path. And since we're focusing on displays and lighting, what is implicit when you decide to focus on the underlying technology platform, not the end product? What's implicit is that you have to have partnerships. That is to say, you have to attract either big chemical companies like Merck and big display companies like some of the ones that I mentioned to you earlier in order to bring it to market. Sure, there's more risk there. And believe me, we've had our issues with some of them. But the beauty of it is that their expertise, which has nothing to do with ours, about actually how you get a product to market, how you create standard high quality displays, ISO 9000, ISO 9001, for those of you that may have played in that sandbox before. The attractiveness is that you've created strong channel and technical partnerships. And as is the evolving case with Samsung, they become interested in acquiring your IP or you personally as a company. That's why we did that. And we spread our joint development agreements across the US, of course, Korea, Greater China, and Japan. Why did we do that? Well, the surface answer is, of course, key partners are in those locations, but there's something deeper than that. There is, for every news bite on the competition between ourselves, for example, and the Chinese, which is very real and absolutely a war for IP and other things, they compete among themselves just as aggressively, even from Taiwan to mainland. And so we wanted at the end of the day to have interest in partnerships across Asia so that we have larger chances to hook on, larger chances to become attractive, and they're highly unlikely to share among each other our technology. I also mentioned, this is not here on the charts, but I mentioned that we have a number of patents which are awarded, by the way, in a number of countries. My experience with patents is that actual protection about what you do technically is really twofold. One is you have to lawyer the patents. It's necessary but not sufficient. And there's a lot of time and effort and expense that we've put ourselves through in order to build patents that are highly protectable. That is, that can't be gotten around in some other technical way. Covers all the cases, covers all the characteristics of the materials or how to stack them in these so-called devices. The other thing, though, is that if you can create technology that's very hard to reverse engineer, and let's be candid here, we've all heard tales, and I have lived tales about reverse engineering throughout Asia, and whether it can go out the back door and somehow be used in a different way or to compete with you. Now, it turns out that while you can take a material and you can analyze it in certain sophisticated ways, how you synthesize those materials are not clear when you try to reverse engineer. In the past, by the way, we've created IP, for example, in our antenna company, not related to this in any way other than customer base, as I mentioned before, that you can literally see the antenna, but it won't, if you take it out of smartphone A, it won't work in smartphone B. So sure, IP is important, but not alone. Reverse engineering and the fact that you can design in such a way that that's difficult, if not impossible, is really key, really key. So to wrap up this portion here, what does market penetration look like for us? Well, there we are with our logo. We're the material and device technology. We're not yet in mass production, but we are dealing with, let me give you an example without revealing too much, because people are paranoid about this stuff. But imagine a big European company like a Merck. They are mass producers of chemicals today. They know how to mass produce them with quality. It turns out, as innovative as our materials are, they're not, the materials now, not the device, are 75% relatively straightforward to synthesize. Again, not where the secrets, that's part of where the secret sauce is, but again, not by any stretch all of it. So we'll have a material partner. We Nanophotonic are not going to set up a huge, likely Vietnamese or Asian, frankly, in this world, production operation for our materials. We are going to partner with others. I tend to favor Europe because of their longstanding expertise in this, to do so. We're going to sell these to the display manufacturer, and then ultimately, which goes into your TV, your smartphone, et cetera, et cetera. So the display manufacturer will provide prototyping, of course, but why, again, is this a valuable approach? Number one, it's our core competence. Number two, these display manufacturers in this blue box already have approved vendor status with the people that actually make electronic products to their right there. They have mass production capacity. They'll have to change it to make it our way. And of course, they have supplemental support at the product level that the end products need. So people like Samsung Electronics, who make smartphones and TVs, use their own display division, but many others as well. So does Apple, and on it goes. So does LG. And so we're using these display manufacturers not only as joint development partners, but those that will actually make the full display for reasons that I've already laid out. So our go-to-market structure looks like that. We'll get paid for the material if we're not bought prior for our IP, stay tuned. But also the license to manufacture our way. I don't mean an IP license. What I mean is how to combine these various layers in an optimal manner and how to test for them. And of course, support. Pre-MP, we've gotten several millions of dollars in joint development agreements. The great thing is that our technology is valued to the point where we can charge these display companies or chemical companies for the pleasure of working with us without requiring us to give our technology only to that single manufacturer. So good for us. That's how this works. That's the business side of how to set up a company that still is, material science. Material science doesn't do it justice. Material R&D and technology. So in summary, ELQ LED is a rising star. We're very good at that sort of thing. And just to toot our horn a little bit, we have 6 joint development agreements with display and material companies. And in the past 2 years now, with the military and vehicle lighting vendors who are creating a very interesting new marketplace for us. And even if somehow people find us attractive and the deal to win our hearts and take us over are closed, the fact that all of these opportunities have been demonstrated is still important. And so that's it for the formal piece. I'd love to take questions in any way you want to offer them up.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Morton, for a very interesting and informative talk. It always amazes me how just things that we use on an everyday basis are as complex as they are, and how we just, I think, all fail to appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely so. Absolutely so.
So let me check, see who's got hands up, and I have a few questions myself.
Sure. I hope you all found it interesting.
Very much so. Richard Petway, go ahead.
Thank you, John.
Okay. Thank you for an interesting talk. I want to push you into a slight subsidiary to your talk, but part of the overall firm that you're representing, and I'm talking about satellite communications.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an article today in today's Wall Street Journal about Elon Musk and his failure rate of the satellite system.
Speak a little closer to your microphone, please.
Okay, sure. Pardon me.
I can hear you, Richard.
So Musk is putting up satellites like crazy, like almost over 100 satellites a month. And he's occupying the space because he's in lower orbit. So
Sure.
there is a degradation probability of them falling back and burning up.
Yeah.
And this is highly unregulated. So it's a first come, first serve market. And I'm really kind of concerned about should there be regulation as we think about it, that this is not a spectrum issue per se, but in essence, a satellite, because
it's a delivery mechanism issue.
Yeah. And I'm really interesting that you've been in communications and obviously trying to provide internet service to the masses require satellites and other technologies to be involved. And I guess I'm a little concerned about, it looks like Musk is out there filling up the space, and there's dangers of collisions between satellites. There is also communication, the higher satellites or further out have to broadcast through a series of lower, and I just wonder if you have any comment in this related.
I do. It's certainly not in Nanobotanical's bailiwick, but I do. First of all, with respect to actual collisions, they file things ahead of the game that prevent that. However, with respect to crowding the skies, a couple of comments. The satellites that Musk is putting up, very briefly, are so-called LEOs, low Earth orbiting satellites. And the reason that he cares about that is for, of course, driverless cars. And the reason he in part, the reason he cares about that is that he needs to deploy an ability to communicate with these cars wherever they may be with very low delay. And geostationary satellites are way too high up in the sky. I think some regulation is coming. I don't have insider information on that, and I would favor that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, we've got a question from Walter Wynn, which is, I think, similar to what I was going to ask, but maybe just
Sure.
slightly different. So I guess my question was, how do you regulate? And I always think of this when I'm out driving at night and you're getting blinded by these over bright, LEDs coming from
Me too.
cars, and how you regulate that intensity. Walter's question is, LEDs turn on and turn off. How do you vary the intensity for displays?
Yeah. Well, first of all, they need not, these displays or anything that uses this stack of materials need not be a matter of degree. They need not be. They can be turned off hard. And in fact, for vehicle lighting, that's what they would be, or they would blink. With respect to the annoying lights, what's unfortunate about that is that that's all regulated, but the regulations for that, and I'll get to your other question in a moment, Walter, are too loose in all candor. And so the lighting producers, whoever they may be, certainly can be regulated down in the way that you wish them to be. The annoying element of the light, by the way, coming at you is not just a function of its luminance, it's a function of its wavelength. It's meant to be, fog penetrating, which is great in fog, not so much when you're, it's late at night and you're still driving and you don't want to be seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
With respect to the use of it in a display where that whole color gamut that I showed you all are in play, you can literally, and I didn't show you a curve in enough curves in enough detail given our time limitation here, but you actually can turn it on in matters of degree by how hard you drive it. And there's actually a process by which, for these displays, the desired picture, which is broken down into instructions for each pixel, which is further broken down into instructions for the driver circuitry. So it's not conceptually straightforward. Now, doing this at the screen refresh rate and doing it accurately so that purple is purple and not blood red is not easy, but it in itself is well-established display technology, not to do with us specifically. The good thing about, but there is a missing piece that let me mention, Walter. It turns out that quantum dots and displays made with QLED technology, there's terms for it, but when they're on or off, or when they've changed from color A to color B, they change almost instantaneously in nanoseconds. Other original display technology like LCD used to have, and to some degree still has to spend money achieving that. So it's a very quick and hard off, or it's a hard change of driver circuitry to where it's not off, but it's yet at a different strength to be mixed with other colors. It turns out that quantum dots have a very, very short relaxation time, which is the term used. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Amazing.
Shirley?
Hi, I am mind boggled, of course. A very big talk about tiny, tiny things.
That's right.
I have very simple questions.
Sure.
Is the sequence of the colors always red, green, and blue? Or are they interchangeable? Because
Well, if they're not, it's interesting. If they're on a plane, not the fancy stacking stuff now, put that aside for a moment, right? Just the way they are normally generated in that second chart I showed,
yes,
on a two-dimensional plane. It's not a question of first, second, or third, because there's a sea of them together on a plane, interspersed by very black, essentially. The interesting part about it is not its first, second, or thirdness, but the size and shape of the pixels, subpixels themselves, Shirley. It turns out there's a whole art, not our expertise, there's a whole art on how these colors hit your eye and how your eye transmits it to your brain. There's another element of games really that everyone in the display technology plays on colors. Those three colors don't have the same lifetime. They fade. I don't mean short, but they fade in a different number of hours, if you will, or days or months. And so games are played on how to fake the eye out into creating sufficiently attractive colors. It's a whole science unto itself. It's not a, I suppose it isn't entirely a hard science, but it's based upon the restrictions often of the materials that they're using itself. So it's not first, second, or third if it's on a two-dimensional flat plane.
Okay.
When they're stacked, though, to the other part, it does matter. Red's on the bottom because it tends actually to more easily produce high luminance for reasons that I didn't prove. And so it's going through the two above it, but it can do that more easily than green, and definitely more easily than blue.
The reason
Blue
I
is the toughest thing to generate.
the reason I asked the question in all of the pictures is
Yeah.
blue on the top, green in the middle, and red on the bottom. But every time you refer to it, you said red, blue, and green. Like,
Oh, there's nothing behind that.
oh, okay. The other question, you know, this is so important. You are out amongst the business world. You are selling things. You are creating things and going to market.
Right.
Is there any intellectual property behind all of this? Does somebody have this?
Yes, we have this, and others do too. Yeah, I tried to get at that, but I obviously was too obtuse. We have a package of about 15 very important patents that govern quantum dots, but those other layers themselves, and how you combine them together in an optimal way. And the details of that is way beyond the cartoon that I showed. There's actual, those layers are actually a couple of layers each, and there's other blocking and other things to make them work better in between them. So yes, we do. And that's very important, because one of the mechanisms, obviously, to succeed as a small company is to have your technology attractive. Even if at the end of the day, the company may be far-flung geographically and may not want engineers here, frankly, anymore, they'll want the technology. Quite
Right.
possible.
Very, very interesting. Thank
It
you.
is.
And suddenly you said nanosecond, and what you're saying is probably escaping me just that fast.
So there's another question, fun question from Walter, who's touching on how we see different shades of the same color. So his question is, your
Yes.
blue shirt has some brighter blue and some darker blue under your collar, for example. How do you do
Right.
that with on-off pixels?
Well, again, they're not entirely on off. They're actually the red and the blue and the green. And believe me, there could be combinations of all of those. Remember that the camera that sees any of us, and I'm probably more in the dark than I intended to be, I apologize, but the camera that looks at all of us transduces what it sees into a set of instructions. But the instructions and the degrees of freedom in the display lighting doesn't have to be pure blue. It can be blue and a combination of black and or red or any other color, so that it looks like blue in shade. It's not binary anymore. It's not like a light for your car. It is actually an artful combination of colors. That would be true if we were looking at the sky as well. It's not pure blue. It's, in fact, skies often almost always aren't. I'm the son of a professional artist, and you know, I was taught at an early age, skies are rarely blue. But if we were looking at the sky, looking at a picture, a painting of the sky, it would take that into consideration, map it into a set of instructions. So each of those subpixels is weighed in a particular way. When I showed that triangle of color, the colors that could be generated, any color in that triangle, so-called color gamut, before, I assume you'll issue these charts or something, Paula?
I'm sorry?
Will you issue the charts? What do you do normally with the folks?
You mean as far as what you've presented?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're available to review.
Okay, anyway,
Yeah.
you'll see.
Yeah, we'll have a YouTube video.
Sure, whatever. But the point is that any color in that gamut, any color can be produced by red, blue, and green, powered, partially on, fully on, etc., by just those three colors. Any of those colors, including the dark shades under my collar or yours, and you have that full flexibility to do that.
Okay. Well, and this may be a somewhat similar, getting the high sign from Julianne to ask the final question. So let me just quickly ask, since you did talk about patents. So, you know, when you get a US patent, how
US patent.
Yeah,
Okay.
how are those protected around the world? Like how binding are they? And then as far as your relationships with your Asian market, how do your two markets mesh and work together without sort of infringing on each other's intellectual property or patents? Whoops. I think we may have lost Chris temporarily.
Yeah, he appears to be frozen. Oh, you should come back.
Okay, that may have been timing. Timing is everything. Okay, well, I think,
Oh, he's going to be disappointed. I'm sorry.
yeah, I think we may be calling it quits for the day, folks. So one more class. One more class next week, and that will end the session. We're going to be hearing from Alex Meadows of Raytheon Principal System Engineers. He's going to be talking about human talent, the pipeline of innovation. So please join us next week. Thank you and see y'all.